Hello and welcome. I'm Kate.
And I'm Emily, and this is Beyond the Neurotype,
A podcast that explores what it's like to be human affirming, regardless of labels, considerate of every person's individual needs, and allowing us to, ideally, understand what is behind every individual's actions, choices, and needs.
We do this with curiosity and love as we explore these individual and unique experiences that are rich with challenges, growth, and grace.
I'm Kate, a mental health social worker and synergetic play therapist. I'm the co-founder of the Village Therapy Hub. I'm a mum to 2 adolescents, and I love understanding and exploring what is happening beneath the surface for children and adults, and what behaviours are communicating to us. But let me keep it real. Much like yours, my life is a roller coaster. So I also understand the complexities of being a carer, the challenges of the day-to-day, and I won't pretend it's all enjoyable.
I'm Emily, a neurodivergent mum to a beautiful autistic girl and wife to a wonderful autistic man. I'm passionate about celebrating neurodiversity and creating a community where people are seen, held, and loved for who they truly are. It is my hope that as you listen to the stories of our beautiful guests, you feel inspired, validated, and supported in your journey.
This podcast is recorded on the land of the Dja Dja Wurrung people. We offer our heartfelt gratitude to the traditional custodians and elders, past, present, and emerging, for continued opportunities to learn, reflect, and grow. Hello and welcome. Today, Emily and I are going to reflect on our most recent guest conversation with Mim. Hello, Emily.
Hey, Kate. What an episode.
What an episode. And I don't think it's unfair to say that this episode has provoked a lot of intense emotion from people. Do you have some thoughts about why that might be?
Oh, and while we were recording it, it provoked very strong emotion in both of us as well. And I think it's because the way Mim lives her life is so boldly about doing what's best for her. And I think when you're confronted with that, sometimes there's this defensiveness or protectiveness almost, because certainly talking to her really highlighted for me some areas where I was living in a way that goes against my values or my family's values, or against my own well-being. And it shone a light for me on where I've been placing importance and where I maybe could have been redirecting that effort and importance. So I think when, someone is so strong in what they do and it's quite different, it can bring up a bit of a,
And I think that's an interesting point, because I think something that people have found really difficult is that, I guess specifically Mim was talking about being a mum. And so I think people that are parents have potentially listened to it and felt a little bit of a triggering around their parenting. And I guess the piece that I want to bring curiosity to is, yes, Mim was talking about her parenting because that is Mim's experience and that is what she does in her everyday and that is her life. But what she's inviting people to think about is whatever is relevant to their life and to their own authenticity. Because for some people, parenting in that way would serve no purpose to meeting their authentic self, because that's not and this is something people can find difficult to hear, but just because you're a parent doesn't mean parenting is one of your highest values. Because your highest values are not dictated by just something like becoming a parent. And that doesn't mean you're a bad parent. It just means that your values, or what's most important to you, or what you're most driven by, are something other than parenting. So I guess it's an opportunity to reflect on what is most important to me and what gives me the most light in my life, and how can I create more of that in my world.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And some people
And
commented to me that they found this idea of thinking from a place of mind, body, and soul quite challenging. I heard
yeah,
people say things like, I think that I am quite a literal thinker, and it's never occurred to me to think about things based on what my body's telling me.
yeah. Which has definitely been the case for myself. I've always been more in my head and less in my feelings.
Mm.
And so then they kind of sneak up on me a bit. And yeah, until they're up here, and that's when I'm like, no, I'm actually feeling something here. Yeah, so I think seeing someone, hearing someone who is so in their feelings and so connected to themselves is, yeah, that quite a contrast to the way a lot of us are, I suppose. Um, but yeah, and that said, with no, it's so easy to start becoming harsh with yourself when we're
Yeah.
talking about this, because yeah, you straight away go into the shoulds and the I should be doing this, and
Mm.
I should be listening to my feelings more, and I shouldn't be so in my head, or yeah,
Yeah. And yeah, I think that's important, isn't it? To keep reminding ourselves when we listen to this episode, when we listen to other episodes, that none of this is an attempt to be a guidebook. All
yeah,
of this is an attempt to just offer different perspectives of thinking and feeling and being, in an invitation to get curious about your own self and what feels good for you and what you need, and yeah, how you would best exist in the world.
yeah. And it's definitely, you don't have to do what Mim does and homeschool her children and um, very attached style of parenting. You don't have to do that in order to still be a good parent. And, for me, when I was growing up, I think I've mentioned in a previous episode, I had a very religious upbringing. And so for me, it was kind of my whole life, I was kind of being brought up to be a mother. And that was where my whole worth as a woman was, it was quite a conservative religious group. And yeah, we were all kind of being trained to become mothers. And so I just wanted this army of kids. I wanted to get married young. I was going to homeschool them. And yeah, that was, and then I had this baby and even before she was born, and I'm no longer in that religion, but still carried a lot of that perfectionism with me of this is how a good, breastfeed them forever, and was never going to do a bottle. Um, and yeah, I had this baby and I hated breastfeeding. And I've never been more relieved than when my milk dried up by itself when she was 3 months old. And because it took that guilt away of being able to then give her a bottle, I took 8 months off work and I was itching to get back. I just needed to get out of the house. I used my keeping in touch days, which most people on maternity leave haven't even heard of, but you're allowed to work 10 days on your maternity leave.
Wow. Yeah, I
So
didn't know
I was
about that
texting
either.
my boss, oh, I need me to cover anyone's leave. Like, let me out. And so, but yeah, for me, I do place a value on doing something outside of being her mother. And you can do that without placing judgment on yourself and without placing judgment on those who are, want to be at home all the time. But yeah, for me, it was quite unexpected. And I felt terrible that I wasn't cut out for this motherhood thing because I actually wanted to have some sort of life
Yeah.
outside of that.
Yeah. And so that's the bigger picture here, isn't it? And the bigger piece from Mim's episode is that there are many, many ways that we as individuals need to live our lives in order to best serve ourselves. And that's what she was talking about ultimately.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think it's really interesting. And I really invite the people that found it a really difficult listen or couldn't, listen to the whole thing or had thoughts that felt a little bit like judgments to just be curious about what that actually brought up for you and how that connects to your own experience and what you're doing in your world.
Yeah. And for me, it brought up, especially I found when she was talking about her experience of being left at kindergarten, I found that really hard to listen to.
Mm.
Um, as someone, yeah, who's a parent of a child that has suffered a lot of separation anxieties, not wanting to go to school, to hear that articulated like that was really painful. It was really hard.
Yeah, I agree. The amount of children I've known that when I was listening to that, I was thinking of, and I was imagining, oh, if they could tell us in all the words right now, this is probably how they would describe it. And yet we continue to put them in that situation. And, to be really fair to parents who might have heard that and then felt like, oh my gosh, I'm the worst parent in the world because I am sending them to this place every day and this is how they may describe it in their future. We are not all in a position for many, many reasons to not do that. And what I would rather see is a system that better supported those people rather than the parents of those people being put in a position where they need to keep them at home when that may not be in their best interest for many reasons, financially, for their own mental health, for their own well-being. There are lots of reasons why that wouldn't work for some families.
And socialization and for the
Yeah.
kids. But yeah, it's doesn't maybe need to be a this or that kind of thing. It would be great if there was a way to kind of soften it for those kids that are more sensitive and deeply feeling and struggle with that loss of the attachment figure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know teachers work really hard to build really strong connections with kids and to, particularly in childcare and kinders to be a mothering alternative. But that's really difficult when you've got so many kids. Even a well-resourced child, kinder is going to have 25 kids to 4 adults. And that's, a lot of kids to be able to build that same level of attachment with.
Yeah, and especially in a kinder where the drop off and the pickup times all the same, you know, in childcare at least.
Mm.
Yeah, when we first put my daughter into childcare part time, it was yeah, at least there were other kids already had their drop off and they were kind of filtering in, and so they could at that immediate moment, um, and they were really amazing. And she formed really close bonds with them, and we'd, you know, for years we'd walk down the street and she'd see someone, she'd run up and hug them, and yeah, I was still friends with some of them on Facebook, and yeah, watching her grow up, and um, yeah, so it was, you know, they were all so lovely and caring, and really looked after her, and would ring me if it had been a particularly hard drop off and say, just so you know, she's fine and she's settled, and um, yeah, but it's still really hard to hear that articulated, and especially I suppose when you know you have a very sensitive child, and that would be what she was feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. What other pieces of feedback did you hear? Have you got some reflections to make?
Um,
Pieces that you heard?
just uh, how heart opening it was,
Yeah.
and yeah, I know you've probably had a bit more feedback than I have this week on this one. Do you want to share
Yeah,
any?
I actually just saw one this morning that I really liked. And they were talking about how they felt like they've been juggling quite a few things lately. And this was a beautiful reminder to pause and realign and to make sure I'm prioritizing what matters most. And I thought that's a really beautiful something to take from this episode, and definitely what, in amongst all the feelings that I felt, the bit I tried to really take from it was a sense of just stopping in the moment and thinking, does this feel okay right now? And sometimes it there's no alternative. Sometimes you might be doing something and thinking, this doesn't serve me at all. Like, how can, this is not at all what I want to be doing. But I think even just knowing that is really beneficial. That it doesn't mean that then you have to change it or stop doing it or whatever, because that may not be possible. But what it does allow you to do is just know, okay, this is something that it feels really difficult, feels like it's taking more from me than it's giving. And therefore, maybe I can think about how I look after myself going forward. Because if I'm doing something right now that feels like it's taking a lot from me, where am I going to regain the energy later on?
Yeah, yeah. I found it really prompted me to look at my personal values, our family's values, um, and yeah, I got my family to sit down and we wrote them out together of what our values were. And then once I did that, I could see, um, you know, there's a bit going on in my life and some decisions that need to be made and some forks in the road, and all of the paths are really unclear. And um, it really helped give me some clarity on why I'm feeling so uncertain. And
Mm.
it's because two values are in conflict, but both need to exist. And but they're kind of seesawing. And yeah, it feels like I could have one or the other, but not both at
Mm.
the moment. And so now it's kind of trying to, well, yeah, which one do I prioritize and how do I bring in enough of that other one to kind of keep the scales a bit more balanced. But
Mm.
yeah, so it's the conversation with Mims really prompted some big conversations in our house.
Yeah, which is really interesting. I'm really curious. while we're talking about this, how did the family go having a conversation about values, and how did you see connection in that for, your daughter and your husband?
Yeah, kind of more like peppered it into conversations for a few days before we actually kind of sat down.
Mhm.
And I'd asked my husband to have a think about it and um, kind of talk to my daughter about it. But often, typical PDA, any kind of asking to do something or participate in something, then straight away doesn't want to do it. So kind of, yeah, it's more effective with her just to kind of pepper it in. And but I actually then wrote them in watercolor and I
Ah,
put them up in the house, and so she was quite interested in that and what I was writing, and I did one and I didn't like it, so I redid it, and so she wanted to keep the old one, and yeah, so was kind of involving her as much as she wanted to be involved and asking a few questions, but I kind of got to be careful not to overload her with it. But yeah, my husband and I sat down and we wrote them together.
mm.
And yeah, it seems really even cheesy or a bit dumb, but actually just writing them out for yourself to see
Yeah,
really just gave us clarity
yeah,
on, yeah, hang on, this is really important to us. And this is why we're struggling, because this really important thing is not being prioritized appropriately.
yeah. And I think it is a really good practice to put them up and make them really visual. And I think the other thing that's important to remember is that they need to be reviewed with some frequency because
Yeah,
they change.
yeah,
And so there's, no expectation that what's your highest value right now will still be your highest value in a month or two's time. And, once we kind of get really good at identifying our values, reviewing them every kind of 6 months is really helpful because they do change. Priorities
yeah.
change.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that. And I think both my husband and I have our own personal values that are quite different to each other.
Yeah.
And so they don't make it to the family values. But yeah, that constant reviewing and juggling, and how do I juggle my own values within my family's values? And,
Mm.
because it's not uniform.
Yeah. And finding, I think, the ways that your values are represented in the family values is important, and are represented in each other's values is important,
Yeah,
because then it helps you to see how they are actually all part of one big thing rather than being opposing forces. Because sometimes we get a
yeah,
bit caught in them being opposing forces and think, oh, you value that and I value this, and those two things are nowhere near each other. So how will we ever make this work?
yeah. So you need that yin and yang, though, don't you? To, you
Yeah.
know, to bring that into a relationship or a family yeah, you need the differences and yeah, like adventure and travel, it would be high up on mine, and that's, not a massive possibility to do anywhere near as much of that as I would like to. But yeah, that's not really one of my husband's. My husband's is stability, and not changing things, and so, but you need a bit of both.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think, thinking about this in terms of Mim's conversation, what she talked about at the core of it was that she was able to see what felt really, really important to her. And then every decision that she made going forward kind of came back to that core value. And that's a really powerful tool, to be so connected with what feels important to you that you can come back to it and come back to your decisions based on that core value, but also give yourself enough backing. Like, because I think it's so easy to say, oh, it's really important to me that I have this piece in my life. But we're so quick to give that away if someone asks something of us and we go, oh, yeah, actually, their needs more important than ours. I'll just forego that for right now and I'll do this instead because I don't want to disappoint them. I don't want to let them down. I don't want any of that stuff. But when we let ourselves down, that's actually, the biggest kick in the guts of all. But gosh, it's
Yeah,
hard, that capacity to say to someone, actually, I'm a no.
yeah. But having those values to fall back on, I find that a lot easier because, yeah, I've got something clear in my mind when I am in a position where I would typically say yes, to help someone else or to, um, yeah, and put someone in my family under them, and rearrange the priorities, or and there's balances, things that need to be done in life, and what have you, but definitely there's times where I've prioritized the wrong thing, and um because that feeling a need to kind of say yes to something that I'm actually a no to, and having those values behind you of like, no, this compromises this value, so this is a no, and just to helps back yourself a bit better.
Mm. Because the cost of saying yes when you mean no is often totally internalized. Because then we turn up and we just do the thing and we do it with a smile on our face and we go, yeah, this is totally fine. While inside being like, oh, why am I here? What am I doing this for? Why didn't I say no? These are all the things I'd rather be doing. And the cost is great. Mm. And yeah, so I felt Mim's episode was a real reminder of just kind of checking in and getting curious.
Yeah, yeah, and leaning into your intuition and your feelings about things a lot more.
Yeah. And it, we don't often talk about the idea that, we all do have really intrinsic and unique perspectives and values and ways of being. There's this idea that there's a way to do life, a way to show up, everything. There's a way. When you think about it, everything that we do in our day, we kind of do it the way we do it because at some point we were told that's how we do it.
Yeah, yeah. Or I suppose we've found our own little way of, I don't know.
Yeah. I think it's probably more common than not, though, that people follow a pattern rather
Yeah,
than have a unique model that exists for themselves. And we know that that's not so common because when we meet those people that have a unique perspective and way of doing it, we find ourselves going, oh,
yeah,
that's a bit odd. Oh, what do you mean? Oh, that's a choice. Like, so because we still have that reaction, no matter how accepting and in awe we may be of those people, we still have those moments of like, oh, that's activated something in my system. That feels a bit funny. So we know that it's not yet the norm to hear people just say, I'm doing this way because that's what serves me.
Mm. Yeah, and particularly around parenting, it's such an issue that can easily feel like an attack, a personal attack.
Mm.
And you see I was looking at a ABC article with a parenting expert that had a little snippet to say about a particular topic, and one look at the comments on Facebook, and it's just, yeah, everyone's so keen to dig their heels in and, you know, really go out the other side, and teachers versus parents, and
Mm.
yeah, and it's so triggers such an emotional reaction, I guess, because of the importance that's placed on raising these humans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the belief that there must be a right way to do it. Surely someone out there has the how do I do this? And I experience that a lot. You know, I have a lot of parents who come to me with an issue and say, okay, so what do we do about this? Like, you know, how do we get through this bit? How do we support this bit? And with the most love and good intention, they want to know how to best hold and support the challenges that their child is having. But there's always an underlying belief that there's a solution or there's a way to make this kind of go away. And I get that because we are always we're a solution focused, you know, brained being. We like to find problems and solve them. So, of course, we're looking for, okay, this is a struggle. Let's see how we can make it better. And I guess that was the other piece that Mim's reflection really prompted for me was this idea that you can just sit in the being without looking to move it or change it or fix it. But that's incredibly difficult.
Mm. One other thing I really took from Mim's episode, and moving a bit away from what we're talking about, that she really talked about the importance of sisterhood.
Mm.
And I just love that. Um, yeah, it's one thing as I don't know, getting further through my parenting journey, just the how important the sisterhood is, and the women that you have around you.
Yes. And the support that women can offer each other in a way that is unique to women. And I guess by seeing that for what it is, it has great power. And
Mm,
sometimes we're our own worst enemies in trying not to like align or I don't know what it is, but it feels like there's sometimes a slight resistance to that idea, almost like it's too like not progressive enough. Is that the way to describe that? Sometimes I feel like people think retreating back to the idea of women's circles and women getting together and supporting each other feels old fashioned.
mm. Yeah, and I think there's obviously this drive to kind of equalize things between men and women,
Yeah.
and yeah, maybe the importance of sisterhood can get lost uh, in those conversations, perhaps in because we are, moving away from mothers doing all of the parenting and the dad's going off to work, and that's shifted quite significantly. Yeah, my husband does pretty much all of the school pickups, and when I was at school, that was unheard of. It was odd when my dad picked me up when he was a full-time student, and so when he was on uni holidays, he'd come and he'd do more of the school stuff, and that was odd at the time. But now you're seeing stay-at-home fathers and
Yeah.
yeah, and a lot more dads at playgroups and at playgrounds, and yeah, but so I suppose that importance of your network of women, yeah, could potentially be getting lost in that without obviously criticizing the progression of, making things more equal between men and women. But yeah.
Mm. And for those women who have needed to step more into their masculine and be more masculine in their roles, perhaps they're single mums, perhaps they're needing to carry more responsibility in the home for whatever reason. Women's communities can feel quite confronting because it's a whole lot of feminine, which can be a lot for people that have needed, for whatever reason, to present more in their masculine as a woman. So I think sometimes that also can cause those women to feel confronted and therefore feel like it's not for them, or yeah, they don't fit in. It's too, I don't know, too mushy.
Wishy-washy,
Too,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh, and definitely, like I would definitely say that I could be one of those people. As someone who, yeah, I probably occupy my masculine, I guess, a lot more. And I find that transition quite difficult between, being in my head and a thinking person, and then kind of coming into my feelings. Is Yeah, that transition can be really tricky.
yeah, and that's true because where there's concepts of right and wrong or heavy logic, there are very clear walls, boundaries, protocols, ways of thinking, processes. And so when we step into anything that's more heart, body connected, suddenly there really aren't any barriers. Like all feelings are felt and they all exist in different intensities, and that's a lot. Like, if to stay safe, we have always carried a very concrete way of doing things.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Which is why sometimes talking about this stuff can be really challenging for people who just feel like, I don't connect with this at all. I don't even know what that is or why you would want to do it. And that's completely okay. Like, there is not one way to be anything. And that is the whole point here, is that there are lots of ways to be human. And whatever feels like it works for you is beautiful. And this is just an invitation to notice another way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've always really the whole time that I've known Nim, which is, 8 years, I'm guessing, roughly about eight
Yeah.
years, I think, that we've known Nim. Um, there has just been this kind of sense of sisterhood and just, yeah, this warmth and this love that emanates from her, and so non-judgmental. When she talks about her experience, she's so quick to kind of say, you know, this is just my way of doing things. You know, she doesn't want other people to feel judged just because she does things differently. And yeah.
And that was why we talked about her being someone that when we first came up with this podcast concept, we wanted to have on. Because even though we know personally it's not always easy to see and feel into the world the way that she strongly practices, we knew that her conversation would invite is curiosity about what makes me me and how do I exist in the world and what feels best. And and a curiosity around the impact of the world on our kids, and that impact is real, and we can know that and then hold support in those environments at the same time.
Yeah. I think for me, and even looking back on, you know, my daughter's earlier experiences, you know, having, I don't know, maybe that insight then might have helped me make some different decisions, but also, like you say, just getting support around that rather than, you know, I feel like when you have a child that feels things deeply, I know that, you know, criticism that was leveled at us about, well, you just need some tough love, that you just, you know, I'm too anxious. She's an only child, so I'm a helicopter parent. All these things, until it accumulated when my daughter was in prep with this. I had an experience with a psychologist at school that just went so against what I was okay with. And it took that for me to go, hang on, what I'm being told here is so wrong. And the school she was at the time sided with me then, but it kind of had to get to that point to be so wrong for me to go, hang on, maybe I am being told stuff and it's not necessarily accurate for her. And then once we realized that she was just showing signs of being autistic, all of a sudden, all those things that I'd been told that I needed to put in tough love, stronger boundaries, blah, 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 all of that went out the window. And, oh, no, now you've got to do this. And, oh, you weren't wrong there. Now,
yes,
you know, and it's like, you know, in your gut that it's wrong, but all these professionals are telling you that, yeah. And so I wish I'd maybe had more courage back then and more of that knowing of myself and my feelings to be able to advocate more strongly.
And I think there's so many systems that are like that, you know, and so I guess if this podcast offers nothing else, it's a calling to just give your intuition some credit and some love. You know, that your intuition is a powerful force and we so often dismiss it because of all the external noise and expectations and chaos. And we don't often look for alternatives when our intuition says this way doesn't feel right. And we're often told this way is the only way. We often feel like there's one way that this happens, and we're told this is what has to happen now. And even though we might feel like, I don't know if my kid can manage this, I don't know if this is what I want to have done to myself, we we go with what we're being told is the only option by the expert or the person we perceive as being the expert. And actually, I wonder how often we're the expert of our own body and our
Mm,
own being. And I'm sure that there are parents, lots and lots and lots of parents, who will listen to this and have examples popping up in their head of times that they got involved in a situation with their child that didn't feel great, but they did it because someone else was telling them that that was the thing that needed to happen. And on reflection, they've wondered whether that was actually the way that needed to go. And I actually think as individuals, if we think about it, we would also have examples of times we've said yes to something that we were definitely a no to. And we said yes because of some external factor, whether it was about conforming, whether it was about that person being an expert. But we all will have in our life said yes, and we were a no.
yeah.
And every time we do that, it causes just a little rupture inside around not trusting ourselves. And
Yeah.
those ruptures build over time when we do them consistently.
Yeah.
Because, I've learnt through my journey that there are often alternatives. There are often other ways to make things happen. And there isn't just one way.
And look, and there's been times where I was a no to things or that were probably misguided, and but having that collaboration as well is so important. Of helping work with you and find alternatives, or rather than you need to be tougher. Yeah, this is the only way. You must do this, otherwise you're going to ruin your child forever.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, which we'll go into in much more detail down the track. But
Yeah. But I guess this call to just take a second and get curious. Am I a yes to this? What is my gut telling me about this? Is this actually the only way? And even if I'm being told it is the only way, could I explore that a little bit? And sometimes we follow something that's being told to us by a school because they're the experts and we've been told that's the way it needs to happen, and maybe it doesn't. And sometimes we're at work and we're doing something a certain way because it's a procedure that's always been followed, or it's a protocol that's been in existence forever, and that's just the way it happens. And maybe it doesn't need to be. Maybe it's time for that to change. So this is just a call for curiosity, except instead of just saying yes and no in accordance with what you believe is what you're supposed to say, then getting a little bit curious about why. Why is this way? And is this the only way that it could be? Because there's more than one way for pretty much everything, it would be fair to say.
Mm.
And I guess that, I guess that it's just about let's just get curious about the multiple ways things can exist.
Yeah.
And be open to that.
Yeah, it's not all just black and white. A lot of the time there's some grey area in there too.
I think there's often a lot of grey. Yeah. And so it would be nice if we could, going forward, move to a space where there's some curiosity about the grey. Because it also takes some of the pressure off all of us to feel like we're supposed to have this thing figured out or know what we're doing or show up in any particular way. But actually messiness is a huge part of it. I met with a young person today who was giving themselves a really hard time because they didn't have it all figured out. They didn't know what they were going to do for a job. They didn't know who they were. They didn't know what they brought to the table. Like they didn't know what they had to offer the world. And I just and all of that thinking comes from, social media and school and this idea that we're supposed to at 16 know what we want to do with ourselves. And I listened to them and I just thought, like, I'm 42 and I still struggle with this. And the gift I want to give you is permission to not see it as a struggle, but to just see it as a part of the process of being a human. Because what you want to do now may not be the same as what you want to do in a few years, and that's okay. Like, it's okay to move around and change and offer different things at different times. We're energetic beings, and energy shifts and molds and changes all the time.
Yeah. It's at that age, when you're a child or a teenager, and you just relate so much to that grasping of trying to figure out who I am, and it doesn't feel that much different now.
No. Speaking of that, I just found out tonight that so my family 25 years ago, so I was 18, my family all put letters and photos and things into a time capsule, and it's just been dug up. And so in the coming weeks, we're all going to get together and we're going to look at them all. But I think, to my great horror, my parents have already read all of the things that were in there.
Oh, God.
And I'm feeling really quite nervous about what 18-year-old Kate wrote in a letter to her future self. I don't remember doing it. Some of my siblings do and have said they've thought about it since then. I don't remember it at all. So it's so interesting, this idea that we can put something away, a thought, and then 25 years later see it. Yeah. When we do a reflection episode after I've opened that, I will share how that feels. Also, I'm quite confronted by the idea that I have an 18-year-old and I was 18 when I did that.
That's a bit daunting.
That feels weird. Also, how was I 18 25 years ago? Like 25 years ago? I'm not that old, surely.
Yeah, you don't look like you're 25 years older than 18. So. I'm just remembering I did one when I was 15 with my best friend at school, and we put it in my backyard, and I know some things that I wrote in that. Just thankfully it was in another country, so
I wonder if it's been dug up.
I don't know.
Well, apparently this was like a Rotary Club thing, and they're going to do it again. So I think later this year, they're going to put another one in the ground to be opened in another 25 years. And my mum is keen, because obviously she's feeling very nostalgic after digging this one up, to for us all to contribute to that one. And so that will be interesting, because the idea that, what will I be, 67 in another 25 years? Yeah, really interesting.
Interesting thought. Who will you be when you're 67?
Yeah. Okay, well, that felt like a tangent, and I don't even know where that just came from. So maybe that's an indication that
time to go.
Time for us. Well, another, really interesting episode. We definitely felt that was definitely the beginning of us describing these podcast recordings as being cracked open. I think it was a pivotal moment in both of us, that recording, and we walked away from it both deeply reflective of how we walk this earth. And as hard and confronting as that is sometimes, it's a really important reminder that we're all unique beings who carry lots of intricacies, and that is it is to be beyond the neurotype. That is what it is to just be curious about the individual as they are and ourselves as individuals without feeling like we have to show up with some particular label or identity or way of being.
Yeah. And so much gratitude and thanks to Mim for being so vulnerable in telling her story.
It was
I know
absolutely an honour and a really difficult episode to record for her as well, and a big step into the unknown to release that episode. So hugely grateful to Mim for sharing so much of herself with us and with our little Beyond the Neurotype community.
On that, we'll see you next week.
Yeah, have a good one.
For more information on today's conversation and guest, head to the links provided in the description. Please like and subscribe to keep up to date with more content, and it helps us out with the algorithm too. Beyond the Neurotype is not a licensed medical or mental health service, and any information or advice given is general in nature. Please seek professional help if anything mentioned in today's episode has raised questions or concerns.